Hello everyone and welcome back to Cogito Ergo Pod, the podcast that looks at the theological, mythological, philosophical and esoteric, and I'll try and do it in a way that makes it accessible and fun for everyone. My name is Daniel, and this episode we are rampaging through the story of the Golem. We will look at the etymology of the name, the stories which are associated with it, and the way that it has survived in the world of popular culture up to today. So without wasting any more time, let's get to it. So, a golem is an animated, anthropomorphic being in Jewish folklore, which is entirely created by inanimate matter, usually clay or mud. It is a creature formed out of a lifeless substance such as dust or earth that is brought to life by ritual incantations and sequences of particular Hebrew letters. The golem, brought into being by a human creator, becomes a helper, a companion, or a rescuer of the imperiled Jewish community. In the Psalms and medieval writings, the word golem was used as a term for an amorphous, unformed material. The most famous golem narrative involves Judah Loeb ben Bezalel, the late 16th century rabbi of Prague, and we will get onto this story shortly. Many tales differ on how the golem was brought to life and controlled. Central to the golem legend appears to be a human desire to create, together with a range of themes including creativity, control, power, and salvation. The golem has also symbolized each era's dreaded dangers and hopes for redemption. According to Moment, a Jewish magazine, the golem is a highly mutable metaphor with seemingly limitless symbolism. It can be a victim or villain, Jew or non-Jew, man or woman, or sometimes both. Over the centuries, it has been used to connote war, community, isolation, hope, and despair. If we are to look at the golem, we need to look at what the word means and where it occurs. The word golem occurs once in the Bible, in Psalm 139 verse 16, which uses the word golmi, my golem. That means my light form, raw material, connoting an unfinished human being before God's eyes. The Mishnah uses the term for an uncultivated person. 7 characteristics are in an uncultivated person, and 7 in a learned one, and that is according to the Pirkei Avot 5:7 in the Hebrew text. English translations may obviously vary. In modern Hebrew, golem is used to mean dumb or helpless, and also to describe an insect in its inactive, immature form between larva and adult. Similarly, it is often used as a metaphor for a mindless lunk or entity that serves a man under controlled conditions, but is hostile to him under other conditions. Golem, passed into Yiddish as Golem, to mean someone who is lethargic or beneath a stupor. Based on these definitions, it would seem fair to say that to be a golem is to be something primordial. It also seems to have moved with the times and become a word synonymous with sluggishness and lethargy, something we can all relate to from time to time. Now that we've gotten to the bottom of the word means, we can look at the wild and fanciful stories attached to this creature. The oldest stories of the golem dates back to early Judaism. In the Talmud, Tractate Sanhedrin 38b, Adam was initially created as a golem, when his dust was kneaded into a shapeless husk. Like Adam, all golems are created from mud by those close to divinity, but no anthropogenic golem is fully human. Adam was a great, meaningless mass, without purpose or direction. There are so many jokes that I could make here. However, early on, the main disability of the golem was its inability to speak. Sanhedrin Tractate 65b in the Jewish Talmud describes Rava, a 3rd to 4th century Babylonian rabbi, creating a man. He sent the man to Rav Zira. Rav Zira spoke to him, but he did not answer. Zira said, "You were created by the sages. Return to your dust." The Talmud relates another tale of rabbis who grew hungry while on a journey, so they created a calf out of the earth and ate it for dinner. The Kabbalists, which is associated with Jewish mysticism, determined that the rabbis did this magical act by means of permuting language, primarily utilizing the formulas set forth in one of Kabbalah's most important texts, the Sefer Yetzirah, or Book of Creation. If only the calf had escaped, then they would have had to eaten his dust. During the Middle Ages, passages from Sefer Yetzirah were studied as a means to create and animate a golem, although little in the writings of Jewish mysticism support this belief. It was believed that golems could be activated by an ecstatic experience induced by the ritualistic use of various letters of the Hebrew alphabet, forming a Shem, any one of the names of God, wherein the Shem was written on a piece of paper and inserted in the mouth or the forehead of the golem. A golem is inscribed with Hebrew words in some tales. For example, some versions of Chelm and Prague, as well as the Polish tales and versions of the Brothers Grimm, such as the word emet, meaning truth, written on its forehead. The golem would then be deactivated by removing the aleph in emet, thus changing the inscription from truth to death, the word met, meaning dead. Samuel of Speyer, who lived 1120 to 1175, was a Tosafist, a medieval commentator of the Talmud, liturgical poet and philosopher. He seemed to have lived in Spain and France. According to legend, he was said to have created a golem which accompanied him on his travels and served him, but could not speak. One source credits 11th century philosopher and poet Solomon ibn Gibral with creating a golem, possibly female, for household chores. The earliest known written account of how to create a golem can be found in the Sodai Razaya by Elazar ben Yudah of Worms of the late 12th and early 13th centuries. Now, the oldest description of the creation of a golem by a historical figure, however, is included in a tradition connected to Rabbi Eliyahu Baal Shem, or Chelm, 1550 to 1583. Rabbi Eliah was a Polish rabbi and Kabbalist who served as chief rabbi of Chelm. A Polish Kabbalist, writing in about 1630 to 1650, reported the creation of a golem by the rabbi, thusly: "And I have heard, in a certain and explicit way, from several respectable persons, that one man living close to our time, whose name was Rabbi Eliyahu, a master of the name, who made a creation out of matter and form, and it performed hard work for him for a long period, and the name of Emmet was hanging upon his neck until he finally removed it for a certain reason, the name from his neck, and it turned to dust." A similar account was reported by a Christian author, Christopher Arnold, in 1674. Rabbi Jacob Emden, a leading 18th century German rabbi and Talmudist, elaborated on the story in a book written in 1748. As an aside, I'll mention here what I heard from my father's holy mouth regarding the golem created by my ancestor, the Gaon Eliyahu Baal Shem of blessed memory. When the Gaon saw that the golem was growing larger and larger, he feared that the golem would destroy the universe. He then removed the holy name that was embedded on his forehead, thus causing him to disintegrate and return to dust. Nonetheless, while he was engaged in extracting the holy name from him, the golem injured him, scarring him on his face. According to the Polish Kabbalist, the legend was known to several persons, thus allowing us to speculate that the legend had indeed circulated for some time before it was committed to writing, and consequently can now assume that its origins are to be traced to the generation immediately following the death of Rabbi Eliyahu, if not earlier. Eliyahu's grandsons, Tzvi Ashkenazi and his son, Jacob Emden, coincidence, were both great halachists. Can we just call these Jewish lawyers? They discussed the legal status of the golem. Could the golem be counted in a minyan, the quorum of 10 men required for prayer? They felt that having a human form and modicum of understanding was not enough to make something human. However, the most famous golem narrative, the Golem of Prague, involves Yudah Lo ben Bezalel, the late 16th century rabbi of Prague, also known as the Maharal, who reported created a golem out of clay from the banks of the Vltava River and brought it to life through spiritual and Hebrew incantations to defend the Prague ghetto from anti-Semitic attacks and pogroms. Depending on the version of the legend, the Jews in Prague were to be either expelled or killed under the rule of Rudolf II, the Holy Roman Emperor. The golem was called Joseph and was known as Yosel. He was said to have been able to make himself invisible and summon spirits from the dead. Rabbi Lowe deactivated the golem on Friday evenings by removing the Shem before the Sabbath began, so as to let it rest on the Sabbath. One Friday evening, though, Rabbi Lowe forgot to remove the Shem and feared that the golem would desecrate the Sabbath. A different story tells of a golem that fell in love, and when rejected became the violent monster seen in most accounts. Some versions have the golem eventually going on a murderous rampage. The rabbi then managed to pull the Shem from his mouth and immobilize him in front of the synagogue, whereupon the golem fell to pieces. The golem's body was stored in the attic geniza of the old new synagogue, where it would be restored to life again if needed. Rabbi Lowe then forbade anyone except his successors from going into the attic. Rabbi Landau, a successor of Rabbi Lowe, reportedly wanted to go up the steps to the attic when he was chief rabbi of Prague to verify the tradition. Rabbi Landau fasted and immersed himself in the mikveh, a ritual bath, wrapped himself in tefillin and a prayer shawl, and started ascending the steps. At the top of the steps he hesitated, and then came immediately back down, trembling and frightened. He then reenacted Rabbi Lowe's original warning. According to legend, the body of Rabbi Lowe's golem still lies in the synagogue's attic. When the attic was renovated in 1883, no evidence of the golem was found. Some versions of the tale state that the golem was stolen from the attic and entombed in a graveyard in Prague's Žižkov district, where the Žižkov television tower now stands. A recent legend tells of a Nazi agent ascending to the synagogue attic, but he died instead under suspicious circumstances. The attic is not open to the general public. Some Orthodox Jews believe that the Maharal did actually create a golem. The evidence for this has been analysed from an Orthodox Jewish perspective by Shneil Z. Lehman. The general view of historians and critics is that the story of the Golem of Prague was a German literary invention of the early 19th century. According to John Neubauer, the first writers on the Prague Golem were Bernhard Auerbach in Spinoza, written in 1837, Gustav Philipson, Der Golem, eine Legende, in 1841, Franz Kluchert, Der Golem des Rabbi Lowe, Franz Klutschak, Der Golem des Rabbi Lowe, 1841, Adam Tendlau, Der Golem des Hochrabbi Lowe, 1842, and Leopold Wiesel, Der Golem, in 1847. In fact, a few slightly earlier examples are known, in 1834 and 1836 respectively. All of these early accounts of the Golem of Prague are in German by Jewish writers. They are suggested to have emerged as part of a Jewish folklore movement parallel with the contemporary German folklore movement. A similar tradition relates to the Vilna Gaon, or the saintly genius from Vilnius, living 1720 to 1797. He was a Lithuanian Jewish Talmudist, Halachist, Kabbalist, and the foremost leader of the Mishnegdim, non-Hasidic Jewry of the past few centuries. Rabbi Chaim Volozhin, 1749 to 1821, reported in an introduction to Sefra de Tzeniuta that he once presented to his teacher, the Vilna Gaon, 10 different versions of a certain passage of the Sefer Yetzirah, and asked the Gaon to determine the correct text. The Gaon immediately identified one version as the accurate rendition of the passage. The amazed student then commented to his teacher that, with such clarity, he should easily be able to create a human life. The Gaon affirmed Rabbi Chaim's assertion and said that he once began to create a person when he was a child, under the age of 13, but during the process he received a sign from heaven ordering him to desist because of his tender age. Now, these are stories, legends, myths, folk tales, how we want to spin them, of examples of golems being created, or supposedly being created, and the roles that they played. Sometimes in the stories they were there as servants. I want to avoid the word slave because can you enslave a being which is not considered to be human? That'd be a topic for another discussion. But also it is a creature which was created to protect people and to ensure their safety. And the myth of the golem has sort of become part of almost everyday life in an everyday culture in a way. Many people are aware of it. You don't have to be Jewish to have heard of a golem. And now if we just do a wild jump from the 18th century up to the 20th and 21st centuries, and how the golem it's crashed its way into popular culture. Golems have frequently been depicted in movies and television shows. Some of the incarnations of it come in the forms of, and be aware that the following, there is some spoilers, a series of films directed by Paul Verhoeven. There was The Golem in 1915, The Golem and the Dancing Girl in 1917, and The Golem, How He Came into the World in 1920. A Czech film from 1939 called Le Golem was directed by Julien Duvivier, and it was made in French. The Golem, the first novel of Gustav Meyrink, and adapted for television in 1967, for film in 1980, and for the stage 2013. The Daimyon, a 1966 Japanese kaiju film directed by Kiyoshi Yasuda. It, alternative titles, Anger of the Golem and Curse of the Golem, was a 1967 British horror film directed by Herbert J. Leder. An episode of X-Files in 1997 called Kaddish, in which a golem is created to kill some neo-Nazis, which is always fun. The 1995 animated series Gargoyles episode Golem featured a golem made in the image of a stone statue that was created by Rabbi Lowe to defend the Jewish inhabitants of Prague from raiders and had been passed down to his ancestor Max Lowe. The golem was stolen by Thomas Brod and his men so that Heilekan Reynard can transfer his soul into its body. Reynard briefly caused havoc in the body before Goliath the gargoyle persuaded him to undo the transfer. Once that was done, Max used the golem to defeat Brod. You Gotta Know When to Golem is a short story during Treehouse of Horror 17, part of the long-running series of Simpsons Halloween specials. The Golem, voiced by Richard Lewis, is controlled via paper notes by Bart and used to wreak havoc on the citizens of Springfield. Sir Terry Pratchett's 1996 Discworld novel Feet of Clay feature a number of golems who reside in the city of Ankh-Morpork. Golems also appear in Making Money and make cameos throughout the remainder of the series. In the third episode of the first season of The Sopranos, entitled Denial, Anger, Acceptance, Tony Soprano is approached by a Hasidic business owner with a troublesome son-in-law he once intimidated into giving up his claim on the business he helped build up. When confronted by members of Tony's crew, the enraged man tells his father-in-law he's created a golem, and later, when Tony insists on claiming the 25% of the business that was offered in exchange, the businessman realizes the metaphorical truth of this, calling Tony a monster of his own creation, made of mud, a golem. When Tony asks what's that, he says a Frankenstein, since many believe the golem legend partly inspired Mary Shelley to write her novel. In 2013's supernatural episode Everybody Hates Hitler, every series should have an episode called Everybody Hates Hitler in my opinion, features a golem who is being used to fight the Nazis in Belarus during World War II. In the present day, the golem has been passed down from Rabbi Bass to his grandson Aaron Bass. While Aaron had a hard time controlling the golem at first, They did help Sam Winchester and Dean Winchester fight against a group of Nazi necromancers led by Commandant Eckhart. Sounds fun. In sci-fi series The Magicians, there is a golem as a main character. It appears in episodes Homecoming and Be the Penny. In 2019's Netflix series The Order, features a recurring character who is revealed to be a golem in Season 1. The majority of CW series Legacies, a spin-off of the Vampire Diaries, centres around defeating a golem. In 2004's book The Golem's Eye by Jonathan Stroud features a magically rendered golem as the main threat. And the Marvel comic book superhero Captain America, as the character's creators Joe Simon and Jack Kirby originally conceived of him, has been described as a variant of the golem concept, a protector of the Jewish community created by one of its elders, Dr. Abraham Erskine. So there you have it, folks. From a potentially innocuous word found in the Book of Psalms, all the way down to Captain America and the X-Files, the Golem has captured the minds of Jewish theologians, writers, filmmakers, and comic book creators. I do not think that there is any real basis to believe that there has ever been a real creature rampaging through Eastern Europe. Surely this is just the creation of a community when it's facing real threats and fears about their well-being. It will come up in later episodes, but the world that many Jews have lived in has been one full of danger, and for them the Golem was their protector. There has always been so much superstition surrounding Jews throughout history, it may well be that there were non-Jews who believed these stories. Nevertheless, this is one of the more fun aspects of what could be at times a difficult story in Jewish history. However, I could be wrong. So for now, thank you all for listening. If you could give me a rating and or a comment, please do. Give me a follow so you can ensure that you'll be able to be kept up to date with each new episode that comes out. Also, you'll find me on Instagram now at Cogito_Ergo_Pod. Remember that each download and follow helps this podcast to grow and goes to show that there is an interest in all things religious and philosophical. So for now, thank you all for listening, and I will catch you again next time.